Hello, people of Earth. This is Tesco with Rip Kenny and Trap Jesus, and you're listening to the Human Music Podcast. Woo!
Human Music Podcast. I like it.
Okay, so this level is good because it is literally pegging the shit out of my console app.
Yeah,
It's good? Okay.
sounds solid.
Pegging
You got
the
against
shit
pegging,
out of
bro.
it. That means something different than you think.
Exactly.
Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it...
And now we're in the Human Music Podcast. What's up, humans?
Yo.
Hey, everybody.
Today, we have our good friend Chris, a.k.a. Cryptochronica, a bad motherfucker on many counts, super cool dude, incredible musician, dope DJ, and good God, one hell of a sensei at the Producer Dojo. Highly encourage everybody who's part of the dojo to go take a lesson and get some feedback from him, because you will learn a lot. What's up, Chris?
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
Thanks for joining us.
Oh, man.
We're excited to have you.
Sweet.
So I just got done a couple hours ago hanging out with Chris. He was showing me some of his new music, and it is like dialed neurofunk style, like jazzy, like funky bass music. It is. I'm so excited for it to come out. Like he played me the song, and the first thing I did was like, dude, when that's done, like you need to send it to me. Like I want to listen to that shit like in my free time on repeat. So I wanted to dive into that first. Like how's music making been going? Obviously pretty darn good. And how do you feel like your style has transitioned or progressed over the past couple of years?
Sweet. Great questions. So thank you for saying all that very kind stuff about my music. It's a lot of hard work, as you all know, what goes into making that last 3% come along. It's lots of blood, sweat, and tears. Honestly, like I flirted with bangers for a long time and was just trying to make like as many bangers that I would have a 2-hour set of all original material that I could substitute out. So if I was going to play like a full weekend, 3 different shows in a row, I would be able to have enough material for like an hour-long set that it wouldn't repeat, or that only like the signature kind of centerpieces would repeat and the rest of the fabric around that would be diverse and different. And a lot of that music wasn't like cutting it for me. And so I kind of stepped back and was like, you know what, fuck bangers. I'm going to just write songs. I'm going to write stuff that's like got connective tissue. So lyrical content and poetry and an emotional kind of aesthetic. So recently, for at least for this EP, I've just been trying to work with professional vocalists because they can take my idea to the frontiers that I can only imagine. So I've been, being a job creator, spending my hard-earned dojo dollars on paying other people to do the heavy lifting for me. And it's honestly the best choice I've ever made. I worked with this chick from Berklee School of Music. Fantastic vocalist, and then also a couple of friends from Hawaii, the soul singer. So I'm really happy more with their work than with my own work. So I'm kind of just trying to let them carry the tracks for me. But it's been really good. It's really, really good. I'm super excited to start to share this with everybody. I'm going in kind of like a soulful, bass heavy, like soul fusion kind of direction.
It's definitely like neo neurofunk. It's like more jazzy, like still very cerebral, but it's got like a very like accessible like point to it. Whereas normal like neurofunk might kind of get into the weeds too much with the sound design. This still feels very accessible for your everyday listener.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm so ready to just sell out and make millions of dollars, guys. So I want something that's accessible and catchy and gonna make some money.
Yeah,
Totally.
Amen. There's this idea among like bass producers and, so many in the dojo, so many of my homies outside the dojo, and 100% me when I was coming up in the dojo thinking I needed to make bangers, just like you're talking about. And between a few flopped bangers, a few songs that were not bangers that people responded really well to, and then the back-to-back podcast episode with LS Dream talking about how he started as Brills. And it was like, you know what? I don't really want to make bangers. I want to make this vibey, emotional, spiritual, connective stuff. And people do a different dance at the show now, but they're just as into it. They're just as connected and in a deeper way. And that reminded me like, oh, right, not every song has to be a banger. None of my songs have to be a banger.
Totally.
Yeah.
I was curious, Chris, was there a specific turning point for you where you knew like from this point forward, no more bangers? And since you started doing that, like what are some new challenges that you didn't anticipate going away from bangers and trying to adapt your music more to vocals and the quote unquote accessible format?
Yeah, I hear you completely. So I still want to make bangers, but it's better to have, in my opinion, a nucleus of a set that can be replayed in every single set, songs that people have like are waiting for and connect to them, and then flesh out the transitions and the drops in between those songs to be kind of diverse and different and stuff that they haven't seen before. So I do want to continuously make bangers, but I would like 10 songs that are just hits, you know, Third Eye Blind, Red Hot Chili Pepper style hits, things that people will keep coming back to. Music that my mom could listen to, which is saying a lot because if it's a decibel threshold over like minus 45, she freaks out. So it has to be somewhat dinner party music. But for me, the big challenge has been doing vocals right. Like getting into vocal processing is really challenging because the human ear is so acute when it comes to human voices that if something is off, you're going to notice it and it's going to just distract and irritate from the rest of the song. So really making sure that my vocal processing, and that includes everything from like just pitch shifts, small amounts of semitones so that everything is like not even a little bit flat or not even a little bit sharp. That's been a challenge for me. And then also getting out of the idea of using reverbs on vocals has been a kind of an unlearning experience. And so I watched the Seth Drake tutorials a few weeks ago where he process vocals in this really, really deep way. And he doesn't use any reverb at all. And he says that because reverb is such like a smeary kind of effect, it causes all kinds of weird phase cancellation. And so to get that really high quality, poppy, professional polish on a voice, he recommends just using many layers of slapback delay. And so I've been experimenting with that using like my finest, nicest, most expensive delays. And the results have been tedious to get to where I want them to be, but when I've gotten there, I think that the result is much, much more polished than anything I've done before.
That's crazy. I would have imagined with especially slapback delays, because they're in that millisecond range where they can cause phasing, that would be a bigger culprit of phasing than reverb. But I'm really intrigued now to watch that and to experiment with that.
So that's in the approach by Seth Drake. It's under the best practices section, but he does like a 2-part tutorial on just vocals, and he really puts all of those techniques to use. It blew my mind because, you know, vocals sound so good under reverb, and I come from like an indie rock reggae background, and so a lot of reverb will take up space and help the track occupy more time and more space, help the vocal track occupy more time and more space inside the mix. So to step away from using reverb was like really counterintuitive, and I thought the bone dry delayed aspect of it all was kind of weird. But once you start doing like 4 or 5 parallel channels of like slightly variable millisecond delay intervals, you get this really cool layered, deep, rich kind of sound that doesn't come from just a plain reverb. So when I'm saying like slapback delays, I'm doing different time signatures from the right to the left, so there's a little bit of a Haas effect and they're widening, but then I'll do like 4 or 5 different delays doing that same kind of thing. So maybe the first one right will be 17 milliseconds and left will be 6. And the second time will be a slightly different kind of delay with like, instead of a tape delay, maybe a sort of transmitter delay or a radio vocal kind of delay, like slightly different flavors. And I will EQ out the highs or EQ out the lows. So there's just like certain frequencies that aren't stacking up the same, and then give that a different temporal setting. So maybe like 15 seconds on the left and 32 seconds on the right. And what happens is all these different stacks become this one really crazy layered sort of rich mechanical kind of vocal. It sounds very much like sounds like the Hollywood version of what a vocal should sound like. It's just really, really high fidelity and clear and sharp, but really wide too. And then I compress the fuck out of it, and it seems to be doing. It seems to be okay. I seem to be liking it, so we'll see where we go from there.
Kind of a modern take on build your own chorus effect, and it definitely it when he was doing that, it really reminded me of, you know, some of the Justin Timberlake tracks that are out, or Justin Bieber, like these big, you know, like extremely well produced, Post Malone even, like where the vocal just shines and shimmers and sits on top of everything effortlessly.
So I got some Post Malone stems a few months ago and was just listening to just the voices, and that was part of what made me or clued me in on this is those Post Malone vocals have like 15 layers, and one of them is just like an ambient layer of him humming with a shit ton of reverb on it, but then the vocals are embedded into that layer even more. It's that whole, I mean, his whole appeal is his voice, and so they spend probably more than half the time making sure that those vocals are flawless. And I think that, you know, humans being egomaniacs are so attracted to the human voice, we prize that over any other instrument sound. So it's important to get that right, at least for me and from where I'm sitting. So yeah, I don't know. I want my tracks to have timelessness in the sense that I will not ever be disappointed about playing them out for people 10 years, 15 years down the line from now. So if I'm going to put out anything, I want to stretch for the stars and have it be like the best that I'm able to. I want to play to the top of my intelligence. And then hopefully that will give it some sort of longevity. So 15 years from now, I can look back and be like, you know what? I'm so much better than I was in 2020, but it's still a good song. So oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say a few things. First of all, it's rare that there is a section in this podcast that I'm so fucking excited to go back and listen to that again and try and apply that to my stuff. But that section on the slapback delays you just explained so choicely. I really am excited to come back and watch this video about just that and apply it. Secondly, I'm so glad you mentioned the timeless quality. That is something that I feel like a lot of people making electronic music, it's so easy to get caught up in genre trends or, you know, banger culture, right? And the issue with banger culture is that it's sterile and forgettable. Well, not forgettable, but replaceable. Mm-hmm. It's replaceable, right? Like insert other 20 tracks here that you can play at the show and everyone will have the same pretty good reaction. But one of the things that I really align with you on is if it's not going to be timeless, like I don't necessarily feel inclined to release it. Like I'm moving forward with the project that I'm doing now. That was one of the key tenets. It's like, I have to be so happy to play this 10 years from now as I am today, or else it just doesn't pass that bar. Right. Moving kind of backwards, one section, one thing that the main thing that I wanted to ask you today, which I'm glad that you brought up, is something that I've noticed that you have been doing, which you explained, working with a bunch of different vocalists that are all super professional sounding, super choice vocal styles in a wide range. And this is also something that a lot of people don't ever really talk about or explain how to access this type of thing. So I was wondering if you would go into as much detail as you feel comfortable with, like how you find vocalists, like roughly how much it costs, if you're willing to divulge that, and like kind of how that process works for you.
So yeah, that's really great. Whenever I reach out to a vocalist, I make sure my track, as Luke knows, I make sure my track is like as close to being ready for the vocal recording as possible. I don't want to present them something that's half formed and amorphous and is going to change down the line as you process it more. So I get the musicality done as close to being finished as I possibly can. And as I'm doing that, I'll often think of like lyrics or poems or kind of melodies that would fit with it. And then when I reach out to vocalists, you know, for this woman, Eva, who is doing the first centerpiece of the new EP, the first song on it, I got in touch with her just through a mutual friend who had offered to work with her before, and they didn't ever do anything. And I was like, do you think it'd be weird if I reached out to her? He's like, no, of course not. So I just emailed her. She got back to me in a few days, and she wanted to work for free. But I was like, you really shouldn't, and you should prioritize your own voice. You should value your own voice in a dollar amount, because music has to be sustainable. And to be sustainable professionally, it means you have to feed yourself. You have to be able to sustain yourself doing this. So I gave her $200. I think it took her probably she said it only took her a couple of hours, but we did do a couple of Zoom meetings back and forth. She presented a rough draft. She did a really, really rough take over the recording, sent it back to me. I was like, I like the melody, but these words are a little bit too teenage. I want some mature kind of poetry. So I sent it back to her. We revamped the poetry, and then she got me another edition. I processed it, and that one was pretty quick. I have a lot of ins in the Hawaiian music scene, or the music scene in Hawaii, which is where I'm from. I played music there for 10 years, just in different bands and stuff. So I know a bunch of people in the scene, and was able to email old friends and be like, yo, remember that soul singer that we opened for that one time? Can I get his number? And I was able to do that. But really, it's just kind of like being really kind, being really nice, and reaching out to people as politely and as you don't want to be domineering, and you also don't want to be pushy. Like, if you're going to reach out to somebody, a vocalist, be like, hey, I'm really interested in this. Here's some of my work, some of my prior work that I've done before. I'd really love to work with you on this. And if you're interested, email me back. There's some money in this for both of us. And then I also think too that COVID has made the music community, we're all having to reevaluate where our money is going to come from. So for people who might not be working right now, I think they're happy for an opportunity to record with up-and-coming artists in order to make a little bit of extra cash. So I guess my main point is make sure your music is danceable, or that they can figure it out with one listen and know what it is that they're supposed to be doing. And then when you approach them, just be really kind and let them know right off the bat that is the amount that you can pay them. So speaking with Sixth Street's fabulous vocalist of a girlfriend, she wanted to do, she has a flat rate, which is a hefty sum, but she's very talented. She definitely deserves that flat rate. And then if you want to add on things like, I would like to get some harmonies, or I would like you to write, I would like you to sing my melody. She charges a little bit more for both of those things, as opposed to coming up with her own melody and her own words. So it's kind of a case-by-case basis.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, that's super helpful information. And I think that the key here is that you have relationships that you've fostered over the years, and you're not afraid to reach out and make those secondhand, third-hand connections in order to get to the opportunity to ask someone to work with them. And then the second key, value that person like they know that they are worth it.
For sure.
Don't hit them up and be like, hey, I'm popping right now. If you do this song, you'll be famous. Let's do this. No, you got to be professional. You got to be willing to pay them for their time. And I think that I'm really impressed with your ability to have so many connections with different vocalists. I think that speaks to how that you're doing it the right way,
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with this idea of enduring relationships. You should have enduring relationships in any relationship if it's going to be a meaningful one. If you're going to have a relationship where it's parasitic and you're taking from others and exploiting the fuck out of them, there's not going to be any reason for them to want to continue to work with you in the future. So treat everyone like they're a potential collab. But when you actually find people that you're going to potentially collaborate with, you don't leave a taste of bitterness in their mouths when they talk about you. You should be able to give them the kind of feedback in the notes that isn't going to be derogatory, like, oh, your voice sucks. I need a 10%, or I need a 10 energy performance and not a 4 energy performance. You need to step up the energy. Those kinds of notes aren't going to get you very far. Whenever you're trying to give somebody feedback or critique, do it in a gentle way. This is their art form too. You don't want to shit all over them.
Yeah. I was going to ask you to touch on that. So can you go a little deeper and like you mentioned briefly the specific feedback that you gave about the lyrics, but in general, what kinds of ways and what kinds of phrasing do you like to give an artist? Because as we all know, critiques can hurt, and especially for us artistic folks who spend a lot of time on something, you want to make sure to soften that blow and present it in a way that is, palatable and actionable. So speak on that. What ways have you found that are really helpful for you to get that action that you need while maintaining the goodwill in the relationship?
So I think there's a big difference between musicians and vocalists, and I think you need to approach each of them with their different kind of tact. For instance, a musician isn't so attached to their guitar line that you could say something like, oh, can you do 16th note arpeggios instead of 8th note arpeggios? That's not going to hurt their feelings because they're able to do that and they're happy to get you what you want. Vocalists, on the other hand, this is like their voice. And so a criticism might be taken as an identity criticism as opposed to just an artisanal or choice criticism. Like I'm criticizing that particular choice as opposed to I'm criticizing you as an artist and your voice as an instrument. So you got to be really careful about saying things about the actual quality of their vocal cords, because this is what they sing to. I mean, they sing to themselves in the shower. They sing to themselves in the car on the way to work. They love their own voice. Vocalists are very much divas, and so you don't want to step on the quality of their voice. So I try and, whenever I'm trying to get to a place with an artist, I'll say things, with a vocal artist, I'll say things that are a little bit more geared towards the choice that they're making. Like, and also the compliment sandwich, that goes so far. Give them the compliment, give them the critique, and then give them another compliment. I find that working with professional vocalists, though, they tend to not be so absorbed with their own voices that they can take the feedback in a constructive way, but still just being very gentle and being very aware that this is this person's instrument. It's not like a guitarist who can, they can just change the tempo or the bend frequency of their finger or whatever. So when I give people feedback to get more what I want, I'd say things like, I love where you're going with this. I would really like to hear a full diaphragm kind of vowel, as opposed to like something that's in the higher register. I want to hear something that's full diaphragm. Or I'll try and ask them, like, I want you to throw your voice to the far corner of the room. So if I want you to sing to the furthest corner in your room, so that way I'm going to get a louder, more projected vocal without saying I need more energy because you sound kind of weak and floppy. So when you say things like that, when you just try and find other ways to get what you want out of them, I think it'll work better for both parties. But you know what? Sometimes it's just like, I like the idea, but this melody is just contradictory. It's just not working with, like Rip Kenny said, it's just not working with this fucking bass line. I need you to do it better. I talked to that dude. I talked to my vocalist, Evan, and he's like, oh, I completely hear what you mean. I totally get it. So he's going to redo the vocals for me. But still a little bit discouraging because I spent 30 hours plus processing those vocals and they're not working out. So, oh well, you live in
The good news is that chain still exists and it works on that voice. There's a good chance you can plunk the new vocal right in there and just like, oh, let me just tweak this a little bit. Save that rack.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Save all your racks if you can. Save all your work. Yeah.
Yeah. It's always like the difference between a pro and an amateur is being able to let go of that time that you spent when it isn't right. That is one of the hardest things to do, one of the hardest hurdles to overcome, going from amateur to better than amateur, is all that 2 hours that you spent rewriting that bass line. It's not actually better. You got to go back to the old one, and you have to be okay with that. You got to bite the bullet, swallow your pride, and make objective decisions for the betterment of the song. And that layer that you spent 2 hours building, this is going to work perfectly, and then it doesn't work. Like, I remember so many times where I would just be like, oh, it's okay. I'll turn it down to like -30. Like, I spent so much time on it. It adds a little something, and I'll just turn it way down and just leave it in there. No. Mm-hmm. No. Bite the bullet, delete it, turn it off. Just delete it. If you turn it off, you might turn it back on. Just fucking delete it if it doesn't work.
Kill the puppy.
And move on. Oh my God, yes.
Never be afraid to kill your baby. Sorry, old yeller.
What did you say in our session earlier?
I don't use the. Oh, are you talking about me? Talking to me?
Yeah.
So I don't use the metaphor killing puppies because I don't know if that fully conveys exactly the feeling, for me at least. For me, it's killing babies because I spend time nurturing them. I'm literally growing this little thing that I love, and then I have to drown it in a fucking bathtub when it doesn't serve me. And I know that's so dark, but this is how I explain this to my students is like, you know what? It's okay to kill the little babies in the service of the great baby. And the great baby is the overall composition. Make sure you're serving the great baby by drowning the little babies that are not necessarily helping.
This is totally sounding like a cult.
The great baby. All hail, great baby.
Am I in the wrong meeting? I thought
That's why
You're totally right, though, Chris.
I like to get people on this idea of seed mentality. Like, if you have a baby, it's a baby. It's your responsibility, no matter how much of a dick that kid turns out to be when he's 2 and learns the word no, or when he's 13 and learns the words fuck you, dad. Like, you still got to keep that guy alive and fed and clothed. And, you know, a hamster has like 10 babies at once and eats 4 of them because it needed lunch. And a dandelion, I don't know, I'm not being like a biologist.
That's 100% factual.
100% factual.
No need to
hamsters are terrible parents. And a dandelion has 1 million seeds, lets them go to the wind and see which ones take hold. And that's what I think is that difference we're talking about between the amateur and the professional. When you're coming up and you've made like 4 songs ever, they're all your actual kids. If you've made like 50 songs, they're like, well, you know, they'll run around. Some of them get eaten by cats. What are you going to do? And when you've made 1,000 songs, it's like Spiderhound was saying on the episode we recorded a couple of weeks ago. It was like, I make a song every day, and 8 out of 10 of them are definitely not even worth going back into. And maybe 1 out of 10, maybe, is worth releasing.
Absolutely.
No, that's it.
Absolutely, dude. I'm always explaining this concept of the 100% to 10% ratio. So you're always only going to use the best 10% of anything that you create out of your 100% of creation. Now, if you only create 20 things, 100% of that is 20 things, and you're going to only use the best 2 things of that 20. Whereas if you put out 1,000 things, be it 1,000 different synth voices, 1,000 different drum grooves, 1,000 different vocal setups, then what's going to happen is you're going to be able to pick the best, basically 10% of that, but it's going to be way more numerically speaking because you've over-created. It's always better to be an over-creator than an under-creator. And it can be challenging to get stuck in the rut of creativity and be like, how can I have more creativity? How can I be more thoughtful? How can I be more full of output? And that's a really hard question to answer because like it gets to the nature of tapping into wherever creativity comes from, that sacred space that we all know how to get into, but isn't always available to us because sometimes it drifts around.
What kind of advice would you have for somebody that's like struggling to finish like a song a week or a song a month to get to that point where they have that abundance mentality to actually like pick the best out of 10?
So I've had a lot of students struggling with this since COVID, and because, you know, the world is on fire in every capacity. So I've had a lot of people with mental health problems, or I wouldn't even say problems, but mental health issues that they're grappling with. And they'll ask like, oh, you know, I'm just not feeling creative. I don't know how to get it back. I'm kind of in a rut. I don't know where to go from here. So I have really like 2 pieces of feedback for this that in my personal experience, or 3 pieces of feedback really, that have just really helped me. The first is find a place of joy, get away from your computer, go exercise, go fucking pet a kitty, go out and just get away from the computer and do something different. Another thing that I say, and this for me is like what I always go back to, is listen to music outside of your regular genre. Go listen to Norah Jones. Go listen to reggae. Go listen to something that is not bass music, that is not electronic, and go figure out what is it that makes this thing great. Even though it's not super high fidelity, even though it's not really wide and really deep and well processed and verbed out and polished, why is it still successful? Why has Bruno Mars sold millions and millions of CDs around the world? Well, go listen to it and go deconstruct that. So I find that getting out of your habits is a good way to grow. And if your habit is to only listen to Bass Nectar, you're not making room to grow. And then my third piece of advice is anytime you're feeling uncreative, the single best use of an hour in the world, in my opinion, you can be baked for it, you can be dabbed out, you can be drunk, is go do an arrangement exercise. such a good use of time that will never, ever fail you. Go and arrange somebody else's song. And whether you want to or not, the ideas are going to come unbidden because you're going to be like, hey, I could do that. Oh, hey, this is where that fill is. I could do that. And so the ideas are going to come whether you want them to or not, simply because you're looking at other commercially viable music.
And for anybody that's listening that doesn't know what an arrangement exercise is, it's one of the most powerful tools in the weekly download, where you take a track that exists already, that's dope, that you love, and break it down piece by piece and figure out what that dope artist did so you can model how they built their track. And yeah, getting out of feeling like you have to do everything in the creativity. I think that's a big part of it. And one thing we've been discussing as a crew recently a lot has been batching your tasks. Like, oh, you need to like write melodies. You need melodies for a song. Well, if you spend all your time like working on the drums and you write one melody and you're not going to try to write a melody for a month because you're still working on the mix of this track, you're not really going to level up on melodies. But if you're just like, all right, today I'm just going to go through patches and write like 50 different melodies and bounce them into a Sparks folder that might like really grab me next time I go sit down to write a full song, and like level up on one thing at one time a lot. Like, do you have any practices like that where instead of going for the whole song, like you break it down and focus on pieces of what you need to get better at?
So I just, the Producer Dojo has started that marketplace thing, and so I sold them a pack or put a pack up there or whatever, and it's basically just kind of glitchy drums. And in that process, I just made like really interesting kind of glitched out cymbals and shaker patterns that I created the little, assembly line or the little factory inside of Ableton, and just made like 14 or 15 a day. And it's a little bit tedious, but I noticed as the faster I started to do it and the more I started to do it, the better they would come out. And so like the first 50 I made, I was like, oh, these are super cool. And then 50 later, after I did 50 more, I was like, you know what, fuck the first 50. I'm just going to completely get rid of those and just work with this more refined set. So I see exactly what you're saying. When you're trying to level up in a skill, like work on just that skill. Like maybe the skill's just finger drumming, or maybe the skill's just bass sound design, or maybe the skill is just writing melodies following PVRD. All that is super, super good, good advice. I love it. I want to just back up for 1 second because I wanted to cover this a second ago when we were talking about using vocalists and other musicians to spice up your tracks. I'm realizing now when I say like go back and listen to other people's successful music because it's really helpful in knowing what works. I've realized that like the best music in the world is never just put out by a single person. Even Bassnectar collabs with all kinds of other input. He's got all kinds of other vocalists and musicians working with him to put out that finished product that gets labeled Bassnectar. I think that it's unfair to ask yourself to come up with everything. And I think it can be a really cool take on music when you invite others to contribute to your project, because they're going to have a different perspective than you are that's going to add something rich that you never would have been able to come up with on your own. So invite other people to participate in your music.
Do you feel like the band background helped you with that? Or do you feel like you went through a phase where as a producer, and especially in the electronic music scene, it feels like there's this expectation put upon you, like you have to do everything yourself, no presets, no samples, no patches, whatever. And so did you go through a phase after coming out of the band where you felt that pressure and you had to overcome that? Or do you think that band background helped you? And
so that's hilarious, because honestly, I left the band world after kind of getting into the electronic music simply because I was sick of working with other people. I couldn't stand having to schlep drums from one venue to another. It's like, where's my roadie for this? I'm not being paid to be the lead guitarist and then also have to fucking drag your drums around. So for me, I wanted to be self-contained. I wanted to be able to do everything myself so that I wasn't dependent and reliable on anyone else. What happens is the music just gets a little bit flat, because you're in charge of everything and you can't think of everything. Imagine if you had to educate yourself from 2 years old all the way your entire life without any sort of input from any teacher. You would have a flat existence. The way you grow is by getting other people's input. And I think the best music has a really tight cohesion between the different band members. Now that said, I love being able to sit down with a band and they'll like watch me mix their music and they'll think what I'm doing is fucking magic. They'll be like, whoa, how are you putting this together? It's like, you can learn this too. Anyone can learn this. Yeah. I don't know.
Science.
Yeah.
It's the ego death of you realizing that maybe you're not the world's biggest prodigy to electronic music, and that maybe some outside input could be good.
Exactly.
Totally.
You got to disillusion yourself of that.
It's funny. We've talked about this on the podcast a few times, but when you start out, the Dunning-Kruger effect, if you're familiar, everyone thinks most people think they're a prodigy, right? And like, it's the working backwards from that step that actually makes you good, which is like just a hilarious inverse relationship.
Yeah, it's hilarious. It comes back to Aristotle. The wise man is the only man who knows he knows nothing. You've got to be aware that you can always learn more, that you really don't know everything, and that it's good to have your blind spots pointed out. When I watch those Seth Drake videos, oh my goodness, it makes me cringe at how shitty I am compared to him, and yet it inspires me to stretch towards that point. So you're never done growing, and you shouldn't ever be done growing.
Yeah.
Totally. One thing he said too that I really love, sorry, Evan, but he mentioned in the approach, he's like, some people, select few people are born with perfect pitch, but you don't need that. If everybody is pretty good with relative pitch or relative mixing, and if you're using references and you're reverse engineering how somebody else did something, we are pretty adept at reverse engineering someone's process or listening to our song back to back to a Bass Nectar song or a whoever's song and being able to emulate those choices. And so that was really eye-opening for me personally and a huge takeaway, because I feel like there's a lot of pressure. And obviously Seth Drake is a god, but I still think people put those people on a pedestal too much, and to hear somebody like him say I'm nothing special, I'm just listening to what that guy does, and then I do the same thing.
Yeah, that's definitely an important point.
Yeah, 100%. So when you were talking about how you spent a bunch of time working on those glitchy drum packs, it was starting to crystallize in my mind why your drums sound so freaking good. When you guys hear his new EP, which I got a little taste of a few hours ago, you will agree with me. The drums are straight up cone sound level, punchy, crispy, clear, and I'm not exaggerating. They're twice as good as mine. Would you mind Would you mind diving into a little bit of your drum processing?
So the first thing is sample selection. It's also really critical to make sure your drums have diversity in the flavors that you're using. I talk a lot about drum processing with my students because a lot of kids come to me how do you snare layer so well, blah, blah, blah. So that's one of my favorite things to talk about. But namely, the main thing about, are we talking groove or are we talking about samples actually? Because it's really important to get the actual groove of a drum track down before you even make it sound nice.
Oh, I think my question was more focused on processing. Groove tends to be more, ambiguous, taste-based, right? But objectively, your processing is really good. So let's focus on that.
Okay, cool. So essentially, if I'm going to start with when I start with something, I really just try and feel that back and forth push and pull swag of a beat or of a groove with just the kick, the snare, and the hi-hat. And if I'm not feeling that back and forth, what we would call meter in music, if I'm not feeling that push and that pull right off the bat from just those three things, I'm informed that those three things aren't working. And once I get that really dialed in, I start to decorate the snare, because a really, really important part of good processing is making sure that snare unfolds along a sort of poetic grammar, in which I mean that each snare hit varies from one hit to another so that it feels like there's differentiation. When your drummer is coming down with his stick, it's going to hit a little bit closer to the center of the snare, a little bit closer to the rim, et cetera, et cetera. So the human ear rebels at repetition. We need to trick the linear computer into incorporating human error. And so I'm always trying to find new ways to do that with snares in particular, because a snare over a 4-minute song at 140 BPM is going to land about 200 times. So we need to make sure that that shit is interesting from hit to hit. So what I'll do when I'm doing snares and I have them unfold along this, in quotes, poetic grammar, is I try and do like linear poetry. So line A, line B, line A, line C, line A, line B, line A, line D. And I make sure each one of those letters is a slightly variable snare. So the things that I look for when I put different like decor on top of my snares or different layers on top of my snares will be finger bells or different hat sounds, maybe different kinds of shaker panned left and right, maybe a different kind of pre-transient, or I'll even alternate reverbs. So it might be like buka-tuka-ka, 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 buka-tuka-ka. And so that way each one has a slightly different hit. But after I do that and I come up with like 4 or 5, I usually make 8 different snares with the same body and same fundamental, but a different top layer. And then I glue it together using a glue compressor with the settings of the slowest attack time, a relatively quick release, about 2 or 0.2, 0.4, and then a 4-to-1 compression ratio. And so once that's all really glued, and I'll makeup gain that and drive that up so that the transient is really fucking sharp and cymaticsy and just like a punch to the face. Once I have that, I bring the rest of the drums up through compression to meet that snare. So whenever I'm doing, I have a formula that I follow for leveling that just doesn't really... It's an objective approach to subjective mixing. So I will mix my drums to make sure that my kick and my snare are exactly the same volume peak-wise, and then I'll bring the hi-hats to be 12 to 10 decibels quieter than them, cymbals 14 decibels quieter than them, and I literally hit these thresholds every single time, and then I'll compress it to a place where the ear agrees. So I'll do group compression using parallel glue compressing, and I usually do something... I compress the fuck out of it, and it'll be like, let's see. So the time signature on that will be the fastest compression time with the second fastest release time, usually a 4-to-1 compression rate. And I'll mix that in parallel on my drum group. And then I will start to bring up that compressed signal more and more and more. So usually about -9 decibels quieter than the rest of the drum group. And that just really thickens up the drums. And then sometimes, if needed, I usually fade the transients off of my hats because I don't think hats need a lot of sharp transient. But if that is needed, I will go back in with the transient shaper and I will make the transients even sharper and more cutting because I like really high fidelity drum impacts. I'm not a huge fan of kind of lo-fi music. So for Cryptochronica sound, at least, I want my drums to cut really clearly. And something that needs to be said here while we're talking about this sort of transient playing is I'm a big fan of linear drumming, which means I like it so that only one transient impacts my mastering chain limiter at a time. And I make sure that even if I have a hat land on top of my kick, that hat has the transient faded off so that the kick's transient is the thing that cuts through the limiter. Because transients, when they both hit up at the same time, if you have a hat transient landing at the same time as a ride, at the same time as a snare, they're either going to do one of two things. They're going to phase out, or else they're going to peak together and sum to this huge transient explosion that's just going to register as distortion in the limiter. So I try and make sure that one transient hits at a time, and I focus on the transients a lot. But a lot of it's just making sure that there's differentiation and variety and detail in the drums, using all kinds of like delays, lasers, and reversed sounds.
It is abundantly clear why your drums sound so good. There is so much detail and care that goes into this. Take notes, people. I'm sitting here just eating popcorn like, oh, yeah, I'm going to try this.
You guys are making me blush. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about what's going on in the lives of Tesco, Rip Kenny, and Luke motherfucking Rain.
Sorry, Chris. We're gonna hammer you a question. This is the Cryptochronica episode.
we know all about us, man. We have to steal all your secrets, man.
All right.
These are gems for real, and I love that you touched up on that, especially that part about, a drummer is going to hit that snare, and it's not. There's so many variables in the real world that snare is never going to sound the same. And I've had a lot of sessions personally where people will be like, why do my drums not hit? And all it is kick, snare, hi-hat, you know? And so I'm really glad that you touched up on that. I know we wanted to keep this processing specific, but I would love if you had like a few short points that people can start thinking about when it comes to groove.
I was going to specifically ask you to go to groove.
Yeah.
We were done talking about
any like little tips.
Okay, the snares sound incredible. How do we make sure people are actually dancing to those incredible sounding snares instead of scratching their head wondering why I can't dance to this?
Absolutely. Yeah. Groove is more important than drum processing, in my opinion, because you can get away with a song that's just like shuffly kind of groove, even though they sound really lo-fi and crappily processed or whatever. So for me, the thing that I make a mandatory first lesson for any student that does a session with me is iterative sequencing. And I talk about that in depth, where you start with a half bar sequence, you duplicate that, you consolidate the whole thing, and you change the second part of it. You consolidate, you duplicate, you change the second part of it. So that way you get this very coherent kind of drum syntax, drum grammar, where the cohesion from bar 1 to 2 to bar 1 to 5 makes sense in context with one another. And then you have these kind of like unfolding paragraphs of drum groove. So I always start with iterative sequencing. I think that's one of the secret DNA embryos of good electronic music, is doing that in every single instrument. So I make sure my sub follows iterative sequencing. I make sure my melodies and my rolls and my fills and everything is following iterative sequencing to some degree. When you're getting a groove, pardon me, I will beatbox stuff out all the time. I will just beatbox like, and then I'll just start with that. But something that I've been doing a lot lately that works really nicely is, we've talked a lot about getting stuff off of the grid, and I think this is really important of everything but that main downbeat on the kick. So I will set my main kick downbeat, whatever the main groove kick is, to being on the grid, and then everything else will be shuffled off a little bit. So even like ghost kicks will be slightly early or slightly late, and I try and think of things in the term of either swag or snap. So in genres like house, you have a very snappy clap, which is a little bit early. And in genres like hip hop, you have swaggy kind of shuffly sort of beats where they're a little bit late. So I'll get my hi-hats a little bit late. I'll get my snares a little bit late. And I'll often make multiple variations of the tracks where I will just have my kick, my snare, and my hats, and I'll make like 2 or 3 different copies of that group, and I will just shift them in different directions each way, and I'll listen to them back to back, and I'll figure out which one is working for the vibe of the song, just by A-Bing them from one to another. But something that's really quick to get really great grooves right off the bat is take a rim sound or take a hi-hat sound with a little bit of body and put the echo plugin on it with a little bit of delay, doing like a dotted delay note. Dotted is the sexiest time signature ever. It's just naturally groovy. You can't go wrong with an 8th note dotted delay. So I will put that on, and then I will vary up the sync timing so that it's like 33 seconds late or 32 seconds early or something like that.
I think you mean milliseconds, but I'm going to let you roll with it.
Definitely milliseconds. Definitely. Thank you for the correction. And I'll turn that on, and I'll let the feedback just play out over 4 or 8 bars, and then I'll record that, and then I'll extract the groove. So that way you can right click on different audio clips and extract the groove from them, or MIDI clips and extract the groove. And I'll save that to my groove pool, and then I'll use that for the entire song.
Run that back one more time.
So if you, I'll just start with a single hi-hat hit, and I'll put a echo on it. And echo is really cool because you can see unlike the delay settings, you can't really see the dotted or quarter note or 8th note delays. So say I want to do like 8th note hi-hats. I will put the echo on, and one of them will be 8th notes. The right side, for instance, will be 8th notes, and I'll put the left side to 8th note dotted or quarter note dotted or triplets. Those are fun too. And I will slightly untime them. So instead of being 0-0 as their sync setting, as their timing setting, I'll set it to like 15 and 22 or 35 or I guess 33 is as high as it goes, maybe 33 and minus 33. And that way the interplay of the groove is variable, and it's different than most people would come up with because you're letting the machine do the work. And so I'll just freeze and flatten that, and then I'll extract the groove and save that to my groove pool and use that in the project.
Wow. I love that.
Yeah, me too.
That's a gem right there.
Cool. I hope I made that clear enough to follow.
Yeah. So then, follow-up question: when you have that groove extracted, and it's not gonna, it is a, polyrhythm of sorts where it continues a consistent groove, but doesn't ever in my head at least, it doesn't ever really meet the starting point perfectly again. How do you use that groove to be a predictable, danceable swing then?
8-bar repetition. 8-bar repetition or 4-bar repetition pretty much invariably. So polyrhythms are the bread and butter of Cryptochronica. All of my arpeggios are in polyrhythms. I try and do my backbeats in polyrhythms. Oh, remind me to tell you guys about the backbeat. Let me make sure to tell you that, because that's a drum tip that I found a couple months ago that's just fucking amazing. Anyway, I will make sure that polyrhythms, because they get really confusing if they repeat too long without or if they go on too long without repeating, I make sure to repeat them either every 4 bars or every 8 bars so that your brain can restart on that position. But like I said, that main kicks downbeat, that one is just always on the grid, and that's a good anchor for the rest of the drums, is to anchor it to that kick on the main downbeat, and everything will kind of wrap itself around that moment in the song. So you always know where your head is going to come down. Okay.
Love it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go for it.
Backbeat. You guys ready for this? Let me see if I can explain this without Ableton in front of me. So I've been showing this to a few kids, especially the kids who are doing glitch hop, because this is like a glitch hop. Oh man, glitch hop technique that I basically discovered by listening to Bass Nectar really, really intensely, because it seems like every single one of his snares has this, and it's very, very subtle. But most of the time, the relationship between the kick and the snare are the two twin pistons driving the energy of the song. Boom to the right and clap to the left, and boom to the right and clap to the left. And that's that back and forth push and pull, that meter that we were talking about. Mm-hmm. But you can take this a step further and create circular rhythms instead of linear pendulum swing rhythms where you just go back and forth. You can create full 4-point circular kinds of rhythms by doing this backbeat technique. It's super crazy. It's going to be really hard for me to articulate, but let me do my best. Essentially, instead of being like boom, cut, the backbeat, you give the snare a backbeat position, not the offbeat. You want to give the snare one more hit, usually using a similar kind of sample to the main snare, so maybe a rim or maybe a quieter version of the snare itself, in between the snare's hit and the offbeat. So right in that equidistant space between the snare and the offbeat, you put this backbeat, which would be the snare. Your downbeat's the kick, your backbeat's the snare, your offbeat is equidistant between the two. We all know those ones. The backbeat's backbeat, so the snare's backbeat, is that position equidistant between the offbeat and the snare itself. And if you use a similar sound to the snare, it feels really subtle. And so what I do is I will put like either a rim there, or maybe again a hat or a click. Clicks for glitch hop all the way. I'll put a click there, and I will pitch it off to the right or to the left, about 35 panning. And that way, instead of being like boom, cut, it's boom, kata, boom, kata, boom, kata. And it pulls your head off to the right. It pulls your head to that direction. And then I'll take that one step forward and I'll give the snare's backbeat another backbeat. So it's the backbeat. And it creates this circular motion where your head is going around following these backbeats the entire time. So it'll be like boom, katataka, boom, katataka, boom, katataka, boom, katataka. And that, the further you pan it off to the right or to the left, you just want to make sure they're going in the same direction. So the first one I'll pan about 35 and the second one I'll pan 50 and make it even quieter. And that way my head follows the whole hit like that. It's almost like the snare has a delay but going off to one side, and your head will kind of just follow it and loop around in this really crazy circular motion. It becomes infectious and it becomes irresistible, and you'll find yourself moving in a circle whether you want to or not. I've been using that like crazy. I hope I made that clear.
Yes, love that.
Yes.
Mind blown right there.
Yeah. Yeah, and you made it super clear by beatboxing it. And I'm always a fan of beatboxing. I thought I knew what you meant, and then you proved it to me by beatboxing it for us. So thank you. Very well done.
Highly underrated technique, beatboxing, or if you're trying to figure out a melody for your song, sit there and just fucking hum at your computer. I will frequently have like 4 layers of just audio channels where I have shittily hummed a melody for like a lead or a bass line or a rhythm for the drop, because I'm sitting there like noodling in the synth. I'm like, I don't have anything. Play the kick and snare, hit record, and just go like that will get you further than so many attempts at trying to do that same exact thing with the synths that you already have open. And even if you're just trying to come up with like a drum beat and you just want to like have a human sequence, literally just use your computer keyboard, one key for the kick and the other for the snare, and literally just boom, cha, boom, boom, cha, boom, boom. Like, doesn't have to be complicated, but just doing that is going to get you a much more human feeling rhythm than you would just like plugging it into the MIDI roll.
Dude, that's great. I love it.
Yeah, that whole technique of using beatbox and you're humming and then making a beat out of it. Actually, I haven't watched the masterclass, but from my friends that have, they said that's basically Timberland's entire process. And that guy's multi-platinum on top of multi-platinum. So who's going to argue with greatness?
Yeah,
For real.
definitely.
And it's really not that hard to beatbox. So, quick anecdote, I used to be a preschool teacher, and I taught my preschool students in order to get their attention, like when they're being unruly, I would just start beatboxing. You know, anytime an adult does something, kids are going to be infatuated with it because they're so uncoordinated and crappy at what they try and do that when you do something totally mundane, it's impressive to them. So whenever they would be like throwing a fit or whatever, I'd just be like, boom, boom, and they'd all shut up and just be like, what's this adult doing? So I started to teach 5-year-olds how to beatbox, and sure enough, they could pick it up quickly, and you just have to count to 4. So what I would do is I'd be like, start doing this, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and now we're going to replace the 2s and the 4s with ka, 1 and ka and 2 and ka and 1 and ka and 2 and ka, and now we're going to replace the ands with t, 1 t, 2 tick, 3 tick. Oh shit, I did it wrong. Of course, here I am trying to.
And now we're going to replace one with fa. And fa.
Yeah. But my point is, if 5 and 6 and 7-year-old preschool kids can beatbox after a couple of trials and errors, anyone can do it. So you really should try and incorporate it into your music, because it's talking your music into the computer as opposed to clicking it into the computer, which is way more zeros and ones than music.
Yeah,
Totally. Pro tip, it should sound cringy when you hum melodies and bass line wobs and whatever. Yeah, you should shudder at the thought of anybody hearing it.
But don't inhibit yourself. Just sit there and literally record a 3 minutes of you doing a bunch of different variations, and eventually one will be like, oh yeah, I think that'll actually work pretty good. And then even if you don't come up with that rhythm exactly, at least you've generated a bunch of ideas for yourself.
For sure. Something else I've noticed for good melody creation is letting other people do the work for you, in the sense that if you play somebody else's song really quietly and put it in another room so you can just barely perceptibly hear it, your imagination is going to fill in the blank spots. And so if you can listen to somebody else's music and let it be quiet and be distant from you, your imagination is going to come up with something, and you can go and record that. And if you listen to the original song that was the source of your inspiration, it's going to be a completely different melody because your brain was filling in the blank spots. So you'll be like, oh shit, that's not even what I was listening to. I thought I was listening to Bass Nectar, but sure enough, it's Godspeed You Black Emperor. And it'll totally come out in a completely different way.
Yeah, that's awesome that you mentioned that. Sometimes I'll be like literally laying down in bed and I have a fan on.
That's it. That's what I was getting at.
Swear to God, there's fucking music playing somewhere. There's my brain turning the fan into some sort of music. It's so strange, but that concept is 100% true.
Especially if you're coming down.
I'm glad you guys bring that up, because I've definitely been like, am I going schizo, or am I hearing like a symphony playing right now?
You guys don't just have music playing in the back of your head at all times? This is not, I thought that's why we were all here. I just couldn't get it to shut up, so I had to learn how to computerize it.
True. You're not wrong about that.
And having some sort of like white noise, like, I mean, there's that classic trope of like the shower idea. You know, it's like you're doing something mundane that you do every day. I'm going to clean my left arm, and then I'm going to clean my right arm, and then I'm going to think of an idea and say, screw soap and the rest of myself. I got to run back to the DAW. And, you know, or like if you're driving, I've had some of like the most inspirational moments and had to use my phone voice recorder to like get the whole idea down just because I was doing something every day. And then all of a sudden the creativity just started pouring out, which kind of brings us back to what we were talking about at the top of the hour. Like, what do I do when there's no creativity? You know, like do something else, go for a drive, take a shower, allow anything. And then something else I've been telling some of my newest, like they're in the earliest stages of their production, my students, and just make crappy songs. Stop focusing on this. It's your third song ever. Stop focusing on why isn't this good. It's just because you're not good enough yet. It's okay. Just go make a bunch of crappy ones, turn them into me, and ask like what's working and what's not. And then you'll be like, okay, cool. I'll keep doing that one thing and experiment elsewhere.
I love that you come to that because I've been trying to get so many of my more beginning students who have a ton of potential to embrace this philosophy of quality through quantity. So make 100 songs that you want to throw away before you create one good one. They all think that they're coming up with fucking opus of their lifetime in this one particular song. It's like, just hold off on that. Learn everything. Because in 6 months from now, you're going to be so much better when you look back. You're going to be like, how could I have thought that was good? But that's part of growing. That's natural. You want that process. But I think what's really important for amateurs to develop, and I mean amateur complimentarily, like at least you've taken the first step on the journey. It's not bad to be an amateur. I'm an amateur in my own way. Like what you need to learn is you need to have confidence in your choices. You need to come to understand what's working and what isn't working. And what I'll tell people, or what I tell myself, because sometimes there's a realization that I'm having about like a particular synth or a particular sound, and I don't want to accept that it's just not working. I try and delude myself into saying, this is working, I can release this. And honestly, you've got to develop a sense of confidence to move away from that. And where I think that confidence comes from, once you have it established, where it comes from, when you know something is working, you're going to be enthusiastic about it working. It's going to feel like, fuck yes, this is sick, this is working. That is working. And when something's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that works, that's not working. So make sure that you're in tune with your own messages. Your body is sending you signals all the time. Try and subdue your active ego voice and listen to the passive body voice and be like, is this working, or am I just deluding myself into making it work? And if that's the question you're asking, it's not working, friend. I promise you it's not working if you have to ask that question.
Yeah, allow it to work. Don't try to convince yourself it's working. That's great advice.
Yeah.
I was having a text conversation with one of our students and you know, biggest supporters, Holy Outlaw, today, and just going over the same stuff. Like, yo, like, you know, you don't have to make this one great. Just make this one, and then make the next 100. And like, there's songs I'm going back to this month that I started 2 years ago. I even put out on my SoundCloud 2 years ago, and I found that song again and be like, oh, I finally know how to make this shit work. It was all right, but like, now that I know how to not make a layer cake, I know how to use the Skrillex Mixbucks template in the weekly download. I know how to, you know, like go through a mix, and I know all of these things now. And then I can find out of that pile of 100 songs I made, the 5 that I actually care about, and go back to those and be like, I'm going to spend some extra time and revamp and re-release these ones officially, because those are the ones that are worth it. But I could have spent 1,000 hours 2 years ago and gotten nowhere but frustrated.
Totally. I'm glad that you guys brought up some points there, Luke and Chris. And shout out to Holy Outlaw. Especially, I think he's trying something like very innovative and treading new ground, and trying to do like blues, electro kind of influence stuff. And he's mixing all these genres. And I'll often do sessions with people where they're like getting very experimental. And we're in a time now where people are really pushing the bounds of music. And I think in that case, especially, like you said, just write a bunch of songs, especially when you're going into this totally untreaded territory. You are that person with the machete going into the jungle and being like, I know that's a clear path, but I'm going to just start swinging over there and see what I find. And it becomes even more so important to have somebody, Chris, like yourself, that's established and has gone through all of those trials and tribulations yourself, to be like, oh, I see where you're going there. Do more of that. And then when they're a year or 2 or 5 down the road and they reflect on their songs, they'll be like, oh, I thought this would work in the combination of styles, but maybe this part needs to be more blues and this part needs to be more electro. And I thought it was the other way around. And so I think it's easy to like lose your path or to get overwhelmed with all these options. And I love that you guys brought up some of those points, namely, don't worry about what's working. Just write shitty songs if that's what it means. And those songs will tell you, that feeling in your body will tell you which direction you should go.
Yeah.
And also, a song is never finished. You know, like Bass Nectar, they're living. They're living creatures. They're the expression of a spirit that you felt for a brief moment that you've tried to capture in time. So it's almost a living thing that you've tried to freeze into the temporal framework of Ableton or of Reason or whatever. Woo! But even Bass Nectar, you know, he's still releasing songs. He's remixing songs that he worked on in 2005, 2006. So even if something has to be shelved, it doesn't mean it's dead and that you can't come back to it. So grow as much as you can grow now. And if there was something about that song that was like quintessentially your spirit, go back and bring that out later once you have the vocabulary and the know-how to do so.
Yeah, you have that art inside of you, but production is about the ability to take that divine inspiration and channel it through the science of production, arrangement, and engineering.
Yeah, you're right. And it's cool that you're using the word science because it is a science. It's not a subjective experience. Electronic music is very objective.
Totally. On that idea of creativity, though, how do you feel about that from a philosophy standpoint? Do you think creativity is also very scientific, or like Luke, you use the word divine there? What's your relationship with creativity? And if you think it is this, you mentioned you tap into creativity.
So I think
how do you cultivate that relationship?
My whole philosophical outlook is basically the antenna theory of consciousness. I believe our brains are antenna, and there are signals constantly floating through the universe. And based on our openness, we can tap into different frequencies. I believe very much that science defines the world. I'm not very, I don't believe in any dogmatic principles about the nature of the universe. And what science tells us is that everything is sound. Everything is sound waves. And so you are receptive to certain sound waves. And there are some people out there who are just miserable, evil motherfuckers. And I think that's because they have tapped into, and their tuning is such, the tuning of their antenna, the tuning of their brains is such that they're always kind of drowning in this dismal, miserable kind of frequency range. And that is affecting how their relationships and how they act on the world. Whereas for me, I think that you can change your tuning. You can change it through psychedelics. You can change it through meditation. You can change it through revisiting traumas and trying to correct the traumas of your lifetime. But I definitely think that all inspiration is outside of us. And I think that's the place that we return to when our antenna is finally damaged. Not that I honestly, I don't even believe in a soul as a concept as such. I believe far more in like the universal consciousness, the universal spirit of all energy and matter, which we are just another expression of. And I think our brains are different antenna that we can kind of gear towards things. So if you watch a bunch of videos of people torturing cats or fucking, killing black people or whatever, you're going to be tuning into that. You're going to be taking it in. You're going to be trying to resonate with that frequency. And therefore it's likely that you'll succeed and that you'll become more negative as a whole because of that. Similarly, you can also try and tune into human compassion and empathy, and you can get the helpers high by helping more people. And the more you stretch for those kinds of frequencies and that kind of electricity, the more you're going to be pulled in that direction, if that makes sense.
Totally.
So I think that we are, I think that everything is outside of us, and consciousness is completely outside of the body, but what we're able to is tap into it in certain ways. So for me, I try and be really sensitive to my moments of inspiration. If something is coming and it feels like this is welling up, outside of my head, but behind me, waiting to come into the computer, drop what I'm doing and I try and channel that thing. But no matter what you do, you can't always tune into those frequencies. So you just have to know and develop a confidence that when you're feeling that, you need to act right away to channel it, because otherwise it's going to be like a breeze and blow past you, and you're never going to be able to catch that inspirational wind again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also that you mentioned, you're not always going to be able to get it down in the exact way that you originally imagined it or you originally tuned into that frequency. But that's okay, because every single one of us is a lens. We're all a lens through which that creativity is refracted. And the way we're shaped by our experiences, by our likes, by our exposures is that. So it's like, oh man, I got this crazy melody. You know, I make certain kinds of drum beats around melodies that I've been exposed to and that I'm inspired to make again. And that's going to be part of my lens. And the types of sound design I choose is going to be based on my tools and my tastes and my abilities. And all of that is what makes it so cool. The fact, it's not that I was able to make exactly what I heard in my head. It's that I'm able to allow the process of inspiration and humanity coexist with technology and make it all flow somehow.
Yeah, I love that. I think that it's a process of letting go to be able to be okay with the fact that you don't have all of the ideas in your head. And it's funny how, like, once you're okay with that, then more ideas come.
Definitely.
It's like, it's so reverse psychology, but
you got to get out of your own way. Your ego is always interrupting and being an obstacle of these frequencies. So you have to know how to get out of the way of those frequencies so that they can be channeled. I think that part of the process of coming up with great music is not getting everything you hear out exactly, because you can't imagine it all. And this is why we do creative mud pies. We use chaos to generate great sounds, because we're not expected to come up with every fucking noise from our imagination. Let the process drive you in directions you would never be able to go intentionally. And you're going to get all kinds of really cool happy accidents.
Happy accidents. Amen. I mean, same thing with like randomly clicking into a preset folder or randomly grabbing a sound and clicking through a sample folder and being like, nope. Ooh, okay.
I can't tell you how many drum beats I've made that have ended up great rather than okay, because I was trying to click in another kick drum on the downbeat and I had the headphone icon on and it like put a kick drum like a few milliseconds before this snare or whatever. I'm like, oh shit, that's actually cool. Like, that's a perfect groove for this. And then you work backwards to go back to that. But that kind of thing is like so integral to the process of making good music that, like, one thing that is tough to understand is when those like little moments hit you, you have to like that instant put it in, because if you're like, no, I'm going to finish clicking in all the kicks on the downbeat and I'm going to come back, you're going to forget where that kick was. The same thing like when you're screwing with a patch and like you move a knob and you're like, oh shit, that sounds really cool. Like, use that thing that just got sparked in your head right that instant and build it into whatever you're working on, so that like all of those, you're able to efficiently channel all of that, you know, inherent randomness of the universe that inspires us into making better music, rather than thinking that you are so good that you're going to be able to fully encapsulate all of those random bits later. Like, no, you have to channel it and in that moment for sure.
Yeah, Chris, you mentioned like the ego getting in the way, and it occurred to me when you were saying that the ego is our illusion of separation, our illusion of individuality, which is,
I think it's also our illusion of control.
Amen. And the actual creativity is tapping into the connection and the chaos and the harmony that comes in the chaos.
Definitely, dude. Definitely. And it's hard to know. It's hard to know like I said, you have to develop a sense of confidence when something is working. So sometimes, not like I said, out of 100% of the shit and the chaos that you make, only 10% of that, even 2% of that is going to be worthwhile in a project. So it's always better to overproduce, because if you have 1,000 things, then you get 20 things, as opposed to if you only have 100 things, you only get 2 things. So it's important to recognize what works, but also to not be too concerned about it and just overcreate. And you can always go back and sort out in a nighttime session. You can sort out what was working from what wasn't.
Yeah, it's funny. Like even to this day, the thing that, with all of my years of experience and knowledge, the thing that I have to continuously remind myself of while producing music is, this shit ain't working. Make more stuff. Like, don't stop thinking about how to tweak this thing that you're working on to force it to fit what you're doing. You're solving the problem from the wrong angle. Like if you're stuck, it's because you're thinking that you can force your ability to make this thing that was in your head work. Try like 10 other plucks, try 10 other bass lines. Like, you'll probably get it on the third one that you try. But like, if you keep trying to do the same thing that you're doing in different ways, you're going to end up with the same mediocre thing in a different form, right?
Yes.
You have to continuously attack it from different angles to be able to come up with the thing that you're like, oh, wow, that's actually unique and interesting.
Do you guys follow the 5-minute rule, where if something's not giving you fruitful results in 5 minutes, you abandon it?
I try to.
Cool.
I'd like to. I can't say I've got a perfect record on that rule.
I feel like it depends. If the idea has given some promise initially, then definitely see it to its completion. But I definitely always tell people, like, especially for any very fundamental parts of your track, which I would say kick, snare, sub are the absolute foundation of your mix. I always tell people if something's even 5% off, switch out the sample.
That's a great way of putting it, because those are the fundamentals. The best producers in the world are just using kick, sub, snares, and like one face, like a vocal chop, like get your motherfucking hands up, and like dance floors go crazy for that kind of shit. So It's obviously working.
I mean, that's basically what you hear at loud shows when it's like totally cranked. Kick, snare, sub, like.
It's true. Where does the music go in those situations? I always wonder that. Like, I'll be eating bread bowls at Panera and I'll just be like, why can I only hear voices and fucking beats?
So do you know about the Fletcher-Munson curve?
I do.
Yeah, so it changes the exaggeration between the differences in the frequency spectrum change depending on how loud the signal is. So the quieter it is, the more rolled off the extreme highs and lows are with the mids. And then when it's at a relatively moderate volume, you hear it. And then when it's cranked at a festival, forget about the mids. Kick, snare, sub, and like maybe extreme high end.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, that big white noise downlifter just washing over everything.
Totally.
You know, you made a killer point, Evan. When it's not working, your loop is not working, stop trying to make it work. Figure out multiple variations of completely different loops and then choose the best one. But then, like we've been taught in the loop menu recipe in the EDM cookbook at the dojo, when you have that one incredible loop, that one killer melody, figure out how to articulate it in so many ways, put it through multiple patches, do multiple instances of different types of processing on it, multiple ways to stutter, chop, and PVRD, present, vary, repeat, and destroy it, so that you don't have to write 9 killer melodies per track. You can make an incredible song with one amazing melody. That's the minimum you need. And if you know how to articulate, once you have that undeniably killer idea, then you can make an entire track out of it.
Yeah, you also brought up a really good point about, so you're working on a loop, it doesn't work, you jam some more stuff out, you find that killer melody, kind of coming back to the same point that we were talking about, letting go of your ego, of everything that you've worked on to that point. You have to be okay with being like, holy fuck, this is the melody, this is the shit. this other stuff that I was working on, that I was trying to get someone to work with that, this shit doesn't work with this melody to the standard that this melody is. You have to be okay with fucking scrapping everything that you've done up to that point and now rebuild upon the thing that actually is going to make a great song. It's really tough to do. And there'll be plenty of times where I have like 5 iterations of a drop with like, I know I like these sounds and there's something in here that's going to work. I have different kick snare patterns, different grooves with the basses. This one goes first, blah, 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 blah. And then this thing comes out of left field like, nope, here's your idea. And this 8 hours of work, 8 hours of, like, I started at 8 a.m. on a Saturday and it is 4 p.m. and I thought I had a song. Nope. Everything's in the trash. New song at 4 p.m. And then it's 4 a.m. and you're like, holy fuck, I'm so glad I was just able to run with this new thing that was way better and create something that actually you're proud of, you know?
So that's a really cool concept that you need to be aware of in your own work, is the idea of this. I think this is a Terence McKenna philosophy, actually, but he says that in the morning we have what are called mental cobwebs. And in order to reach your maximum articulation, your maximum ability in any field of getting out what you want, you have to practice clearing out those cobwebs. So if you're a speech giver, you need to practice talking before you're going to give a good speech. You don't want to just wake up at 8 a.m. and start to go and give your fucking your commencement speech or whatever. So that is the same thing with music. You have to spend a few hours clearing out the cobwebs, the stuff that might not be that good. And then once you kind of build up the rhythm of it, more good things are going to come to you because you've spent time clearing out yesterday's junk.
100%. I love that you guys touched on a lot of points. Again, I feel like we're touching on so much good stuff here, so many gems. That idea of you find the one part that is the centerpiece of the track. I've always likened that idea, and like you said, Evan, this new part comes totally left field. It's as if you're watching Spider-Man and then all of a sudden you hear, "This is Sparta!" And then now we're watching 300 and it's like, whoa, what just happened? But when you find that melody, when you find your Peter Parker, let's say, of the song, the same way you can't build up a good relationship with yourself, or you can't get to know a friend or a significant other until you've seen multiple aspects of their personality. You need to see that main melody stretched and mangled and reverbed out, and then at its like fullest intensity. And it's much like Peter Parker being the awkward sort of kid, then he gets bit by the spider, and then maybe drop one or chorus one, he's like slinging webs and like flying through town, and then the breakdown is like, oh, he's been, suffered his first defeat or whatever, and then there's some moping around, and then bam, final chorus, drop 2, drop 3, whatever, comes back, defeats the supervillain, outro is like, now he's like got the girl, or the main character has like triumphed over the whatever. I think that Hollywood movie formula transfers over to songwriting very well. And much like you would be, dare I say, foolish to say you like truly love your significant other if you've only been in a good mood with them. It takes going on vacation with that person. It takes going through hard times and conflict to see how they react in this situation, when things are going horribly, and then when things are going amazingly, and then when things are, at a standstill, sort of boring. And like seeing this person or even yourself go through multiple emotions gives you depth, and you attach to that character. If there's a movie and some secondary character dies in 5 minutes into the movie, you forget about them 5 minutes later, because maybe they're just Happy Steve that brings donuts into the office and like, bam. But if you knew that alien spaceship that just crashed onto Steve also like, crashed on his mother, and he dedicated his whole life to like figuring out what these aliens were, and you see he suffers from alcoholism because of this event, and you see all these different aspects, then it's not just happy Steve that brings donuts into the office that you forget about, then it's like, whoa, this is a deep thing that I can now attach to emotionally.
What you're talking. Oh, go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, I was just gonna say you sparked an analogy in production with that beautiful other analogy of when you're working on something. Say you're working on like a patch in MIDI, and this is your significant other, and you've only seen them in a good mood, and you're afraid to change too many things because you already like this patch and it's in MIDI, and if you change one or two things the wrong way, it's not going to be the same patch and you're not going to be able to move forward. So you're just like barely adjusting little things, trying to make it from good to great, because you're afraid to hurt their feelings. You're afraid to have the tough conversations to connect with that patch on a deep level. What you got to do is bounce that to audio and have the tough conversation. You got to mangle it. You got to stretch it. You got to reverse it. You got to see what it's going to do. You can't be afraid to just barely move knobs to get the song that you want. You got to have the tough conversations and duplicate that track and go ham, and then you might get the great one.
PSA,
Spoken like a married man.
Do not mangle your significant other in any way. Audio only.
Good point. Good point.
Only your audio significant other.
No, it's true. I love it. Spoken like a married man. I love what you're talking about, Tesco, because like I come back to that all the time. Before I studied music, I studied theater and drama, which is super esoteric and unnecessary. But whatever, it's got its gems. Yeah. But what you're getting at is narrative structure, and that a song has to go through a narrative arc, just like a character arc. If fucking let's pick what's a good story? Frodo throwing the ring into the fucking fires of Mordor. If Frodo just gets the ring and then walks up and throws it in, there's no change, there's no adventure, there's no story there. It's this clear beginning, start at point A. You go through a change that makes the character end up in a different way or have a different realization or come to some sort of growing experience, and then he concludes in a different place, or she concludes in a different place, this arc that makes interesting melody writing and interesting songwriting. And so often I feel like a lot of people's kind of narrative is there's not a roller coaster of ups and downs, of changes. It's all one energy level. Maybe it'll be like level energy 60, as opposed to occasionally having a breakdown that takes you down to energy level 25, and then having a buildup that takes you to energy level 75, and then you have that drop energy level 100. We need the roller coaster in our songs throughout the entire song to drive a narrative that changes and that makes it interesting and worth listening to.
Amen. 100%. The hero's journey of music production.
Absolutely.
I wanted to end on this note. I think this would be a strong place to wrap things up. Do you have any go-to ways when you found that main part, like, yes, this is it, this is the main part of the song? How do you like to go about it from section to section and make sure your song maintains that cohesiveness?
So two things. Great question. First, I don't like to think about things in melody format. I like to think about things as hooks. And the big difference between the two is a melody is a long, sweeping sequence of notes like Bach or Beethoven or Wagner, whereas a hook is much more like Michael Jackson or Lady Gaga, and it's an earworm that infects you and gets stuck in your head. We want our music to have repeatability, to have repeat listens, so people come back and can't get enough. And so hooks are very, very, you can deconstruct the format with which a good hook is made. And essentially what that looks like is a short sequence of an odd number of notes that repeats. And the reason we use odd numbers of notes is because we are writing 4-to-the-floor music or 4/4 music. So whenever you use an odd number of notes, you're going to get an interplay between the time signature and the melody that's really interesting, as opposed to just having an even number of notes coming down on every downbeat, offbeat, or backbeat. So when I try and write a melody or a hook, start somewhere simple, repeat it multiple times, and follow PVRD. So if you look at the great hook writers of our day, Lady Gaga, Bruno Mars, et cetera, can't read my poker face. That's 3 fucking notes. She repeats it 3 times in a row, and then the last note she sustains a little bit longer. So catchy, so easy to do. It's easy to copy that kind of format, and she's following PVRD in a lot of ways. So,
sorry, not to cut you off. Do you want to just briefly just explain what PVRD is?
Present, vary, repeat, and destroy. So you start with an idea. Maybe your idea is la da da, and then vary the idea. So you present the idea la da da. You vary the idea da da da. Repeat the idea la da 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 la da da. Destroy. So that way you have these variations from one bar to the next. Now I like to take PVRD one step further than the dojo. I don't actually do PVRD by itself. I like to think of it as PVRD squared. So it's present, vary, repeat, differentiate, and then present, vary, repeat, destroy. And that over 8 bars or 4 bars works really, really nicely, especially if you have that happening on a subline over 8 bars, over a chord line over 4 bars, and over a lead melody over only 2 bars. The interplay from one P to the V to the R to the D is going to be constantly switching up and creating that kind of coherent song grammar that I've been trying to get at.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yes, this whole podcast episode it's been absolutely gold plated. Seriously, thank you so much for joining us. And
you guys, I've had so much fun.
Yeah, dude, part 2 incoming sooner rather than later, hopefully. Holy fuck.
I'm so glad you guys had me on. We had like 4 weeks where we were trying to make this happen, and it just kept being like one form of phone tag after another. But I love you all. I love your music. This has been so fun. And Dojo members, keep producing. Produce every day. Get into the habit of producing every day.
Amen.
Much love to you, Chris.
Go get a lesson
having
from
you.
Cryptochronica.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. All right, take it easy. I'm going to go smoke some weed. Later.
Well earned. See you, brother.
Peace.
I like it.
What's up, humans? It's Luke, your friendly neighborhood trap Jesus. Thank you so much for watching our videos. We appreciate you. Remember to like and subscribe to our channels. And if you have any questions or topics that we need to cover on the show, put them in the comments. Appreciate you. Peace, and peace among worlds.